Welcome to the KIX EAP Podcast, your monthly podcast with important leaders in education from Eastern Europe, Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia, and the Asia Pacific. I'm your host, Ryan Allen, assistant professor at Chapman University here in Southern California, and my own background is in international and comparative education. Let's start the show. Today we have Batjargal Batkhuyag, the executive director of the Mongolian Education Alliance. In the interview, we talk about his background, the Mongolian educational context, and the work of his NGO, including how it shifted from a donor organization into a civil society organization. Let's go to the interview. All right, thank you. Welcome to the show today. If we could maybe hop into your background a little bit. You have a bachelor's degree in teaching languages in your home country, but then you jumped to a degree over in Teachers College, Columbia University in New York. So can you maybe talk about that experience moving from Mongolia to New York, or how did you get into sort of international education or international education development?
It was not planned, first of all. It was a kind of pure luck. I got my undergraduate degree in teaching, as I said, and I was working with student teachers who were going to be teaching English and or Russian languages at schools. And one day I got information that one foundation was providing scholarship opportunities to study abroad in the US. And I was interested in, but I wasn't sure if I should apply, and waited for maybe 2 years. And then 1 year I decided to apply and applied, got into the program. And it was the Mongolian Foundation for Open Society. And they had a program called Mongolian Professional Fellowship Program. And they were giving opportunities for young professionals to do a master's degree in the US universities. And I got into this. When I applied, because I was working in an initiative teacher training institute, I was looking at higher education. But when I got into the program and when I met my academic advisor, Gita, and because of my interest, I wasn't really much concentrating in higher education, but rather in education policy. Got into the program, came to a completely different context. It was a really different experience. It was almost 20 years ago now. And it was just a couple of years after the 9/11, and coming to New York and experiencing the real melting pot, which I used to talk to my students, but it was a good experience to live the life and meet people from different backgrounds, from different cultures. So it was a great experience, and I think it was a turning point in my life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. As I mentioned, I also studied with Dr. Gita Steiner-Kamsi, so we have that connection. But after that, you return to Mongolia, and you begin working with the Mongolian Education Alliance, and that's your current organization as well. And it from my understanding, when you went there, that organization was still relatively young. So maybe can you talk about sort of maybe what is that organization first off, and then second, what is it like to sort of help foster and build an organization like this?
Mm-hmm. So Mongolian Education Alliance was registered as a local NGO in 2004, 1 year before I joined and before I returned from the States. But it wasn't a new organization. It did not start from the scratch. Actually, it was the foundation, part of the foundation, the Mongolian Foundation for Open Society. And they were the education programs, and they were running programs in early childhood, primary and secondary education. So when the foundation started, they had a plan from the beginning that they would start programs, build local capacity, and phase out. And that happened in 2004. And, it was, I think it was a challenge in the beginning, to shifting from, not just shifting, it was almost like a transforming from a donor organization to a civil society organization. So I think it was a big shift. The first mission was to foster open society values into education system and identify underserved areas of education in Mongolia, education reform in Mongolia, and contribute mostly by providing support in developing human resource in education sector. So that was it. And I joined the organization first as a fundraising officer, and I was trying to look at what can be different ways to help the organization sustain its activities. It's been now 17 years since the organization started, and there's been few changes over the course of the time. Now I think the organization is much more mature, and we have been recognized as one of the leading education NGOs in the country. So yeah, it's been a great challenge and wonderful journey, and experiencing the different reforms in the country, in the education system. In some reforms, we have been in the leading roles.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic, and absolutely a challenge to sort of switch from that kind of organization. You mentioned these educational reforms, and if I'm curious, can we kind of jump into some of the reforms that the NGO has sort of worked with? I know you worked with the government and the Ministry of Education. What are some of the key challenges that you're facing and that you have helped to sort of change or alter or are pushing?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the reforms we have been involved is, one of the recent ones is involvement of parents and the wider community into school life. So there is a legacy from the previous system that parents considered the role of child development and education mainly done by schools and education institutions. On the other hand, schools were required to engage parents and maybe the wider community into different parts of school life. So there's been this mismatch, and some research showed that the parent engagement at school was at about 30%, which means about 30% of parents in a particular school would be involved in one activity or two that was organized by schools. And it appeared that mostly it was the parent meetings and maybe some cultural sports events that parents were invited to. But what we emphasized and focused on was engaging parents into school life in two different ways. First, we believe that parents are the primary educators of children because children are in school just part of the day, and most of the time they are at home with family members and with parents. And when the children are young, especially, they need support from their parents in development. So one of the channels that link school and parents is parenting education. So the school, maybe the kindergartens also, would be providing information and other sources for parents so that they know about child development and what they can do to support their learning and development. The second way is parents' engagement in school governance and contribution to make sure that learning that's happening in the school is meaningful. We tried to focus on the second part of it so that parents become actively engaged and they know what's happening in school, what are the issues, what are the problems, and they can be ready to contribute in addressing these issues at different levels. So the schools in Mongolia would have school councils. There is only one parent representative, but the larger body that engages parents is Parents Association, or in some schools, Parent-Teacher Associations. So through that, we helped schools do self-assessment of their activities, engaging not only teachers, management of the school, students, parents, but also the wider community. The other entities, business or local government agencies, other social services come together, look at the school life, do assessment, and identify what areas they need to focus on. And then they plan activities together, implement it, and monitor and evaluate it, and then do the assessment again, so that it becomes a whole cycle and it becomes like an ongoing process.
I'm curious because, to me that makes sense as an educator myself, having parents involved, but I could foresee maybe some pushback from either, maybe the schools are saying, no, this is our job, or parents say, no, that's their job. Did you see those kinds of conversations, or what was the pushback, or did you get any pushback from this kind of reform?
There's been a general policy-wise, schools were required to engage parents. But the problem that schools had were they were not really, they didn't know how to engage parents meaningfully. For instance, about a quarter of Mongolian population lives in rural areas and mainly as nomadic herders. And they would be living 100, maybe 200, even 300 kilometers away from the settlement, from the school. And they would be sending their kids. And, it is difficult for them, for instance, to get information about the school, come to the school, or know how the child is doing in school. We worked with schools, rural schools, and together we found different ways of engaging, or rather attracting parents into schools. So one of the innovative ideas was every village settlement has a meteorology center, and they have a system that sends out SMS messages to nomadic herder families when there is a natural disaster, or when there is a blizzards, or flood is coming, or something like that. So the school had an agreement with the Meteorology Center, and they used that SMS messaging, mass messaging system to communicate with parents. So parents started getting SMS from school about their kids or about activities in the schools. So that it was one way of engaging. And, getting a personal message from a school made the parents to want to engage, want to learn more about, want to communicate with schools. So that was one of the ways. One other school had an idea that, approximately, I think I mentioned about the 30% engagement rate, and majority of them were mothers, grandmothers, or sisters. So the school had an idea of engaging fathers. So they only communicated with fathers so that they created a group of active fathers to be engaged in school activities. One school later on, when parents started engaging, they created groups so that they monitor school activities. They devised lesson observation sheet to be observed by parents. So we are curious what parents who are not educators can observe from a class, but they had plenty of things to observe, like the interaction in the classroom, whether the teacher is engaging with all the children or only a few, whether students are interested in the classroom, whether they are actively participating, whether the teacher is using different learning materials, and if not, why, and so on. So they started really looking into how learning is going on in the school, and started thinking of different activities like linking the life with the learning. So they started, inviting children to different entities so that children know about what's happening there, and trying to link it with their learning. Engaging children, inviting them to, for instance, to the local museums, and linking it with the learning. So this started whole movement in mostly in rural schools, so that the school is becoming much more lively, vibrant community, and becoming like a real community center of the places.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing success story. And I think with COVID and digitization, it sounds like Mongolia is maybe a little bit ahead, at least in thinking about what outside of the box, or maybe breaking some of the standards. One of the other things that you had sent over to me that I was really interested in was this idea of the Open School monthly newspaper, and just this idea of sort of reaching different teachers, educators, researchers, policymakers. So can you kind of talk about maybe that project?
So the Open Schools newspaper, we have been running for more than 24 years now. So it is a monthly newspaper, printed and distributed to schools, and it is the rural teachers and schools can subscribe it through the postal system. So in this initiative, we have two main objectives. One is, and the main objective is to serve as a bridge among schools and teachers to share their experiences, share their learning, share their practices, good practices. Until certain time, it served as the main kind of exchanging platform of practices. Now, there are more options, with the technological development. There are different platforms, websites, applications where teachers can exchange their practices, but it still serves as one channel for teachers. The second objective is we try to address issues, to start a conversation, to start even a debate on issues that are emerging in education or that are underserved, overlooked issues, and try to bring it up to the relevant stakeholders. If it needs to be included in the policy, then we try to bring it up to the decision makers, policy makers. So the topics that we have recently touched was the issue of integrity in education. We try to look at address the issue of inclusive education, what it means and what it entails, and how to help schools become more inclusive. So these are some of the topics we try to address.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned the stakeholders and looking at the work of the organization and your work. Oftentimes that seems to be the Ministry of Education or other government agencies. Can you talk about that process, or what is it like to work with the government agencies or the different representatives? Maybe if there's people moving in and out of different positions or coming in, what are kind of the challenges, and what are the ways that you have found success in working with different government levels and officials?
Mm-hmm. The biggest challenge for us is there is a frequent turnover of the staff, people at the ministry and other agencies that we work with. So one of the issues that was raised was the same issue, and we shared, exchanged ideas of what we do, what could be our strategies, tactics to work with different agencies. And I think, being persistent is one, because NGOs they have a certain mandate. For instance, our mandate is to support teachers so that, they are equipped with methodologies to help students become better learners, lifelong learners. For instance, one of the agenda is, to make sure teachers get the necessary support from the system, from the institutions, from the schools that they work, and get support from their peers as well. So to be persistent is to talk about, what teachers, first listen to teachers, what kind of support they need, and what can be done to make sure they get this support, and to use every opportunity to talk about these support systems. This support needs to be better financed. In other words, for instance, in order to, like the new concept of professional learning communities take place, they need some resources, and some of the resources are financial. And if there isn't adequate funding in the school budget allocated for professional development, continuous professional development, it doesn't happen successfully. So, use different opportunities, platforms to talk about but the issues that you are trying to address. This is one of the things. And one of the things is that you have to be ready. So if an agency, if an official calls and asks for an advice or for ideas, you should be ready. Otherwise, you don't have such opportunities all the time.
I appreciate it. I actually like how you used your and you and talking about, people are listening around the world who might be thinking about these things in their own sector, their own society. So I can appreciate that. We're kind of coming to the end of the interview. So I just have sort of one maybe final question. Researchers from outside of Mongolia or even international organizations, coming into Mongolia, what is often missed or maybe misunderstood by these groups maybe coming in, and how can we help to elevate sort of maybe the local voices and the local ideas when we're talking about these issues?
Education sector, the Ministry of Education, they work with different governments, multilateral or bilateral organizations to create opportunities for Mongolian scholars to go abroad and study, get degrees. And one of the things I think is not done adequately is to do the same for the sector itself, to create opportunities for the teachers, scholars, researchers in education to have more of that opportunities. One. Second, I think the higher education sector should play a role here. But they cannot do it alone. They need funding for that, which is to engage more in research. There are initiatives taking place, but to make sure the researchers, professors at universities, they team up with NGOs or other players and do research, because the research skills is not acquired through training. It is, I believe, acquired through research. If you don't do research, you don't become a researcher. So, to create opportunities for these young researchers or those who are interested in research to be engaged in research projects.
Those both are quite interesting. So thanks for raising those. We've come to the end of the podcast. I want to thank you for joining me today. So thank you very much. I know it was short notice, so I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And this concludes our KIX EAP podcast, which is released every first Wednesday of the month. Of course, the opinions expressed on the KIX EAP podcast are solely those of the host and the guest. The KIX EAP podcast is made possible by KIX, which stands for Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. KIX is an initiative of the Global Partnership for Education. Globally, KIX is administered by the International Development Research Center in Canada. NORAG in Geneva hosts one of the 4 regional hubs of KIX. Find us on the NORAG or GPE KIX websites. You can subscribe to the KIX EAP podcast, newsletter, and webinar series, and also learn about KIX global or regional projects. Additionally, you can subscribe directly on Spotify or SoundCloud to receive notifications of the new monthly podcast episodes. Thanks for listening.